Good evening. I'm Diane Bystrom, and I'm the director of the Carrie Chapman Catt Center for Women in Politics at Iowa State University. And on behalf of the center, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's lecture by the 21st Mary Louise Smith Chair in Women in Politics, noted journalist Gwen Ifill. The chair was actually announced in 1995 to honor the Iowa native and longtime political and civic leader Mary Louise Smith, who was the first and only woman to chair the Republican National Party. She was a mentor, friend, and role model to many in the world of politics and civic government and community affairs. And for any of you who know Mary Louise or knew of her, she passed away in 1997. She was the epitome of a civil leader. And again, really just a great friend of politics and women. Through the chair, the Catt Center is able to bring prominent women leaders, such as Gwen Ifill, to campus once or twice a year to speak with members of the university and local communities to inspire us and engage us in the political process. Gwen's visit to Iowa State is also part of the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday celebration on campus. And as part of the celebration, her visit is supported and co-sponsored by several organizations, including the Black Graduate Student Association, the College of Agriculture and Life Science, the College of Design, the College of Engineering, the College of Human Sciences, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Miller Lecture Fund, Women's Leadership Consortium, Women's Studies Program, and the Committee on Lectures, which is funded by the government of the student body. Introducing Gwen tonight is Amanda Ulrich, a senior from Storm Lake, Iowa, majoring in journalism with a public relations emphasis, looking for a job right now, and she's a great intern, so I'll tell you that. She's a valued member of the Catt Center student staff, which actually includes 8 students, 2 graduate students and 6 undergraduate students, with whom's help we could not run the Carrie Chapman Catt Center. Among Amanda's many duties as a public relations intern at the Catt Center is the planning and promotion that goes into the Mary Louise Smith event. So I asked her to introduce Gwen tonight because of her involvement in that event. So please welcome Amanda.
Thanks for the plug, Diane. Good evening. It is both an honor and a privilege to introduce tonight's featured speaker, Gwen Ifill. She is not only an admired journalist and best-selling author, but also a role model for young women everywhere. A native of New York City, she graduated from Simmons College in Boston with a major in communications. Currently, she is the moderator and managing editor of Washington Week and senior correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. Before coming to PBS in 1999, she was the chief congressional and political correspondent for NBC News, White House correspondent for the New York Times, and a local and national reporter for such newspapers as The Washington Post, The Baltimore Evening Sun, and the Boston Herald American. Her work as a journalist has been honored by many, including the Radio and Television News Directors Association, Ebony Magazine, and Boston's Ford Hall Forum. Adept at handling complex issues and different, sometimes opposing personalities, she has moderated several political debates, including the first presidential debate during the 2004 presidential campaign between Dick Cheney and John Edwards, and the vice presidential debate between Joe Biden and Sarah Palin in the 2008 campaign. A notable journalist with a long career, she has received more than 20 honorary doctorates and currently serves on the boards of the News Literacy Project and the Committee to Protect Journalists. She is a fellow with the American Academy of Sciences. Please join me in welcoming to Iowa State University the Spring 2011 Mary Louise Smith Chair in Women in Politics, Gwen Ifill.
Thank you. Thank you. Hire her, what she said. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I feel like I have to start by saying that Diane will tell you that it's true that we've tried to get here a couple times, and each time something comes up. So finally she employed my best friend, Michelle Norris. She told her, Michelle was like, but you have to go. I said, I know I have to go. I'm going to go. I'm going. No, but they're really nice there. They really treat you well. And so before Michelle sicked her children on me, I decided I would have to come. I am thrilled to be here. I've had a lovely day today. I've been already talking to students and finding out things and trying to pick everybody's brain about 2012, and don't think I won't do it to you too. Because I love coming back to Iowa. There's always something fun. And I want you to know Iowa State was where Washington Week came. Maybe some of you were there in the year 2000, where we did a show, an audience program here on campus. It was the first time we'd ever done anything like it, and it was really kind of exciting because that's when I discovered David Broder was such a rock star here. Everywhere he went, people just followed him around. I finally felt I had to go be the go-between, but it was great. I'm glad to be here. I'm mostly because I'm happy to be out of Washington. Got to get out of the bubble every once in a while, and it's also good to come to Iowa in the spring. It's slow coming, but it beats January. So I thank you. But I've been discovering that it's been getting harder and harder for me to get out of Washington, out of town, out of my job, to travel and talk to people, especially on college campuses like this, because the news business, as it is now configured, has become such a 24/7 proposition. Everywhere you look, it seems there are earthquakes and tsunamis and fires and war and uprising. And then there are elections, which offer their own kind of chaos, which I've come to appreciate and like. Because not only do I get to indulge my junkie-like addictions to politics, but I also get to ask all the questions that I like, of whom I like, and to do it in a way that takes me, and I hope you, beyond the soundbite. On Washington Week and the News Hour, we approach the news with a fairly simple premise. We assume that this is going to shock you. It's novel. We decide that you can decide what you think if we just give you the information to work with. We are not to be confused with cable television. We hope you never know what we actually think, or that we ever reach any personal conclusions about anything at all. You don't really want to stand behind me in line to vote. It takes a long time. But we believe that you are hungry to know things, that the rigors of daily life have not yet managed to entirely obliterate the need for information that occurs beyond the end of your nose, beyond your neighborhoods, beyond our borders. I covered my first presidential election in 1988. I have to tell you, the story of that is I was the lowest woman person on the totem pole at the Washington Post. And so, therefore, they would send me out to cover whoever was about to lose. So I would walk into a nice Union Hall here or somewhere in Iowa, and there would be Dick Gephardt or Bob Dolan. They'd go, "Oh, no." It's the angel of death. But never since then have I experienced, or did I expect to experience, a presidential election like we all experienced and that I covered last year in 2008, 2 years ago now, I guess, where everything seemed to be at stake so much all at once. We covered the debates, the breakthrough moments. And through it all, the toughest thing I find is sorting through all of the noise so that you don't lose sight of the history that's being made. On any given day, it can be tempting, far too tempting, to be swallowed up in the rush of news and blogging and commentary and tweeting about important issues, and then lose sight of the issues themselves. Issues like poverty and pain, deficits, bailouts, joblessness, health care, freedom and democracy. All too often, the slogans dominate and the reality fades. And we become consumed instead with debates of a far more basic variety, like, was he wearing an American flag pin? Plus, thanks to Jon Stewart and Saturday Night Live, it has become downright entertaining to focus on the silliest aspects of what it takes to run for government and to govern well. We like that. It takes a little of the pressure off, but still. Now, it should also be said, I do love Jon Stewart, and I watch him whenever I can stay awake long enough. But one of the things I like best about him is he knows he does not do what I do. Frequently, when I'm on campuses like this, students tell me, "I'm sorry, but Jon Stewart's the only news I watch, even if it is fake news." But guess who he watches? me. Just saying. So I have a few things to share with you before I stop to take your question, which is, by the way, the part I most look forward to, because hopefully I get to pick your brains, learn from you, and go tell the world. But let me anticipate a few of your questions first. You'll want to know if Washington is as screwed up as it looks. And the answer is nothing could be as screwed up as it looks. More on that in a moment. You'll want to know if journalism, my profession, is hopelessly out of whack because of what you see when you turn on your television sets or fire up your computer. The short answer is we're not quite as out of whack as it seems. In fact, we are a lot less screwed up than things look. More on that in a moment as well. You will want to know if Jim Lehrer is as cool as he seems. And the answer is he's cooler than he seems. And funny. And then you will want to know whether I liked it when Queen Latifah played me on Saturday Night Live. I know you're too shy to ask the question, but since rather than wait for you to bring it up, I just thought I'd just tell you I liked it a lot. And so would you. I was visiting another college not long ago when I just saw myself described on their website as a noted Beltway journalist, which is exactly the thing I've been working for 25 years not to be called. But I've gotten used to being boiled down like that. When I was writing my book, the book Diane mentioned, some boiled me down to Obama booster, just because they knew the book, which at the time was not yet written, dealt with the topic of race. That's all it took to become an Obama booster. That and his name is somewhere in the title. In other venues, I am boiled down to other things, some of it correct, some of it incorrect. If you judge me simply by reading my bio, you could also brand me an activist on behalf of immigrants, because my parents were born in another country, an activist on behalf of free speech, because I believe in the First Amendment, women's rights, because I'm a woman, red lipstick, because I wear red lipstick. Some of that would be true, and some of it would not be. There is one description, however, that I have recently come to embrace, and that is as a leader. I got my undergraduate degree from Simmons, as you heard, a women's college. And that experience taught me a lot about how to function in an environment where the words woman and leader are not in conflict. It's especially gratifying to be here during the tail end, the very last day of Women's History Month, at a place where Carrie Chapman Catt learned how to be the first, but not the last. It's a relief, actually. Everywhere else I go, it's all about firsts. In my business, we finally have women news anchors. Yay, Katie and Diane. Yay. But I keep an especially close eye on politics. I've been counting it up. We now have 6 women governors, 4 Republican, 2 Democrat. Only one, Jan Brewer in Arizona, was not a first. There are 17 women in the Senate. 76 in the House. And even with the breakthrough of having had the first woman Speaker of the House, that's not a lot. Still, it is safe to say every one of these women and every woman in this room has smashed a few glass ceilings in her day, one way or the other, which is gratifying and it is historic. And then what? I thought about this a lot when I wrote that book a couple of years ago. It was actually about breakthrough candidates. I set out to write about African-American breakthroughs, but quickly noticed as I was compiling the list of the people I wanted to profile that there weren't that many women on the list. And I tried to figure out why. I thought to myself, doggone it, I'm a woman, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. But then I came across a Brookings Institution study, which surprised me. It described what they said was an ambition gap that keeps many women out of the mix. One woman politician said to me when I asked her about this, it's like the train left and we weren't on it. I think we decided we didn't even want to get a ticket, and that's the difference. The barriers to higher office for women are varied and complicated, but sometimes the simplest episodes illustrate the problem. My favorite one is when Senator Carol Moseley Braun ran for president in 2004. She would frequently arrive on stage wearing her signature tailored skirt suits. And she would immediately walk on stage to discover they had put high stools out there for all the candidates to sit on. And she was expected to climb onto them and perch there throughout with her knees clamped awkwardly together while her male competitors kind of sprawled comfortably. I ran into Hillary Clinton at the State Department last week, and she reminded me that's why she stuck to pantsuits. Then there was the mayor of Atlanta, Shirley Franklin. She worked in city government for 3 mayors before she finally ran for mayor herself. And that only happened because she was recruited. When I asked her why it took her so long, she basically had been running the office, running the city. By the time she became mayor, she was in her late 50s. She told me, "I did not think that I was worthy to serve." Imagine that. Other women told me they didn't like raising money. Some felt a greater duty to raise their children, and many chose other paths to public service, particularly in the nonprofit sector. I think about these options, constrained as they remain even now, when I talk to young women. Twice I've had a chance to return to my alma mater to deliver the commencement address and look right into the eyes of these young women who are about to go out into the terrifying world of job hunts with Amanda. And I would have to look at them and tell them they'd been lied to for 4 years. They'd been told they could have it all. Not true. You can imagine how well that went over. I really ruined a graduation day. You might be able to have it all, I told them, but rarely all at the same time. Often these women wait until the speech is over then to pull me aside and ask, how is it that I balance my work and my personal life? And I tell them, once again, another buzzkill, it's hard. Usually not what they want to hear, but at least we have choices now. In that world of choices, I've learned how to be a woman and a leader and a role model and informed. And I've learned that when you add race to the mix, that's when it gets really complicated. And my first newspaper job, it was actually an internship. I worked at the Boston Herald American, which at the time in the mid-'70s was a place full of, it was at the real throwback of a newspaper, crusty old white guys with starched shirts and cigars said, "Get me rewrite." I swear they said this. And they had never seen an educated black woman up close before. They did not know what to make of me. But, we became friends. We became buddies. We hung out. I did my job. I was perfectly pleasant. I did not put salt in their coffee. It worked out fine. And then I arrived at work one day to find at my workspace a note waiting right at my space that said, "Nigger, go home." Now, my first reaction, and this will tell you a little bit about me and how I was raised, was to look at this note and say, who is this for? I was genuinely puzzled. Not for long, but long enough. I took this to my bosses, and their first reaction was that they were not puzzled. They knew exactly who it was for. They knew who had written it, but they didn't want to fire who had written it, so they offered me a job. And I, of course, said I will never go to work for these racists because I needed a job a year later, and I took the job. Now, the secret was that may have been not the neatest way to get me in the door, but once I got in the door, I turned it into the first stepping stone to my career. I didn't spend a lot of time with the chip on the shoulder worrying about what drove this. I knew that if they took me seriously, I could run with it. I'm an optimist, and I came by this optimism kind of honestly. My dad, who was an ordained minister, was what I would call an accidental feminist, which is to say he wasn't really that crazy about women in the pulpit or anything like that. But he raised all of his children to fight, and he neglected to tell his daughters no. And my mother is the one who taught us to say yes, but he taught us never to. He didn't tell us to say no. And not taking no for an answer has come in handy throughout my life and my career. It came in handy when the mayor of Baltimore, who I covered when I covered City Hall in the mid-'80s, bristled, and he would scold me when I asked him tough questions. Once he said I acted like I was a school teacher or something, which had puzzled me. I didn't know what that was exactly supposed to mean, but I think he meant it badly. It came in handy when a radio talk show host trashed the entire Rutgers women's basketball team by dismissing them with a nasty racist and sexist slur. And I was able to defend them. I was by then in a position to be able to defend them not only in the op-ed pages of the New York Times, but also on Meet the Press. It came in handy when the vice presidential candidates told me they were shocked, just shocked to learn that black women suffered at disproportionate and skyrocketing rates of HIV infection. It came in handy when Dick Cheney told me he couldn't answer a question in 30 seconds, and I said, sorry. Not that way, but that's the way it came across. And it came in handy when critics decided that because I was writing this book, and because the book had Obama in the title, I was not fit to moderate a debate, even though I'd moderated one 4 years before without incident. I just put my head down, I did my job, and the critics faded away. So when I talk to these young women, I can still tell them to reach for the stars, for whatever they want, and I can mean it. I tell them what I've learned along the way. I tell them to be curious. I tell them that there are no dumb questions, which is not strictly true, but I tell them that anyway. I tell them to learn how to write. I tell them to challenge authority appropriately. And I tell them to strive for the possibility. It is this striving that has fueled the ambitions of Harriet Tubman, who saw the possibilities in escaping slavery, and Sojourner Truth saw the possibilities of what women could add to the national conversation, and of Carrie Chapman Catt, who saw the possibilities of how equal access in voting and simple justice could transform a nation. It's because of these visionaries in the end that I became a journalist, that I get to believe that the search for the truth and the search for justice are not incompatible, and that they are in fact essential. I have a flat spot on the front of my head, which you probably can't see. I cover it up. It's from banging my head against walls. I've been doing it for years, for my entire career, forcing diversity of thought and opinion onto the pages of the newspapers I worked and onto the air where I work. And some weeks I am more successful than others. But how fortunate it is that I'm in a position to have the choice to fight and the ability to set priorities. We're all trying to build our careers and live honorable lives and work hard to give our children all the choices they deserve. But who wants to knock down walls and break through glass ceilings only to find out that our sons and daughters don't want to follow along behind us, that they don't want to walk through the new doorways or get to that next level? We can't let that happen. By example or by exertion, we have to reach behind and drag them along. It shouldn't be hard for the women I know because we all carry a hammer in one hand and hope in the other. We're trying to use the hammer to build those stairs for some other woman's children or your own, for girls you mentor, or for the perfect strangers you meet on the street. We don't have any choice in this matter. We have to live in a world of expectation. We should expect to be treated as equal citizens. Our children should not expect to be inferior. We should all expect that anything is achievable, if not now, soon. I got into journalism because I thought that on some level, I guess I could change the world, that I could shed light in a few dark corners and break down a couple barriers. Barriers are often still there. The corners are often still dark. And I've discovered the world is often still resistant to change. But shining that light, a light of justice and a light of understanding into the world, it can be tremendously satisfying. At that point, I'll stop, and I'll be happy to take your questions. Thank you. Now, I wasn't lying when I said that this is my favorite part, and I don't know if there are microphones for people. There's a plan.
There's a plan. There's a plan. Thank you, Gwen. Yes, before we get to our question and answer session, we have a special presentation by Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. Making the presentation are sorority members Nicole Bartolowski, and I even practiced this beforehand, and Aisha White. So please join me, ladies.
Sorors.
Hello.
Hi.
Oh, can you get up?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, she's got.
Just give me a second. I'll get here. It might be just a little slower. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nicole Bartolozzi, and I'm currently the president of the Ames Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And this is my vice president, Aisha White. And we'd just like to take a moment of your time to present one of our newest members with a token of appreciation. For those of you that may not know, Delta Sigma Theta is an organization of college-educated women committed to the constructive development of its members and public service with a primary focus on the Black community. So on behalf of the Phi Chapter and Ames Alumni Chapters of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, we want to present Soror Eiffel with this small token of appreciation for letting your voice be heard and extending your knowledge on politics and race relations. Your acceptance as an honorary member in our sorority is a testament to your contributions to our mission, and we give you this with thanks and sincere congratulations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have to explain. Less than a month ago, Soledad O'Brien and I were both inducted as honorary members into Delta Sigma Theta. My sister has been a member of the sorority since she was undergraduate in college and has been after me for years to be one as well. And every city I go to, the Deltas come out, man, and they bring me stuff. So thank you.
Okay. Now for the plan for the Q&A. You should see a mic in the center aisle back there in between the two spots here. It's time for questions, and like Gwen said, she really wants to. I already have someone standing at the mic, I can see. Please come to the center mic, and please keep your questions as brief as possible so that we can take as many questions as possible. You're also going to have time to meet with Gwen and talk to her after this event tonight, as there's a reception and a book signing. You can also purchase copies of her book. So at this point in time, we'll take questions from the audience and take it from there. So,
Thank you.
Purchase copies of the book.
I just thought go ahead. I'm sorry.
Good evening, Gwen. Thanks for being here. My question is this. You'd mentioned that when we knock down open doors, or break through glass ceilings, we should drag our youth behind us. That seems really difficult to do. It seems like so many young people are really complacent. How do you recommend we do that?
It's a hard question because I was just talking to one of the students at dinner who said, no one's paying attention really anymore, and I find that to be wildly different from campus to campus. But I also realize I draw a self-selected crowd of young people who are more likely to be interested. I don't know. I think it's by example. I really don't think we can get up on a pulpit and say you've got to pay attention. In my house, the connection was constantly made to what decisions were happening in the world and what effect that had on our lives. I never doubted for a moment that if someone signed a Fair Housing Act, that it might affect my life, partly because we were living in public housing at the time, so I saw the point. But also, it doesn't have to affect you. I find that young people are incredibly optimistic. They just don't necessarily know what the connection politics has to their lives. And so if you appeal to their sense of optimism and to the sense of doing good, there's a reason why Teach for America and other public service projects are oversubscribed year after year after year. And it's because there is a wellspring of optimism and public service instinct among young people. And we just have to we have a responsibility to give them an outlet. In Iowa, it seems to me that there are more opportunities than not to show the connection between what happens in politics and what happens in our lives. And I think that every chance you have a chance not to be cynical about it and to tell them that, that's part of the responsibility of adults. Hi. I don't seem to be getting any sound, but I can repeat the question until we get it right. Go ahead. I can hear you. Just talk loud. I'll repeat it for now. They'll fix it. Or not.
Gwen, I just want to say I really appreciate
Now it comes back. You see, the mic is working now.
Now it
All right.
goes. Thanks, Holly. Gwen, I just really appreciate the words that you had to say. I'm actually involved in political office because they do feel downtrodden by the kind of convoluted.
I'll vote for you just because you handled that mic so well. I don't know that I have advice. I'm not very good at giving advice on things that I myself don't have the courage to do. Because I think it takes a tremendous amount of courage, no matter what your gender, to get into elective politics. And that's why I think a lot of women are drawn to nonprofit sector. If you're getting into to make an impact, sometimes you just don't want to deal with a lot of the crap. You just want to get to the point. And that's, you got to be prepared to deal with stuff in order to be an elected official, which is why so many people you respect get in it and then get out. So many people you don't respect get in and stay. But I would tell you that I actually like politicians, because the vast majority of the politicians I met in my career are honorable people who got into it for the right reasons and stayed for the right reasons. We pay attention, of course, to the rogues, because that's, if a chicken flies, it's my chicken fly theory of journalism. If a chicken walks across the street, nobody notices because chickens are supposed to walk or hop. But if a chicken flies, everyone will stop and take note of that, because that's different. It's unexpected. It's new. And that's what we pay attention to, the rogues and the people who don't do it as expected. So I think there are many levels at which you can give back, and I don't think politics is the only one. Elected politics. Getting up every day and still having a job in journalism is one of them. You think I kid? No, actually, I am actually kind of proud that I knew I wanted to do this since I was a single-digit girl. I always wanted to be a journalist. Wanted to be a newspaper journalist. Television was an accident, but I wanted to do this, and that I still get to do it when so many people I know in this business don't is huge. I don't really boil it down to individual things I do, because I think the body of work is what's important. The fact that I get up every day and try to create an environment where civility exists, where questions are thoughtful, where answers are not truncated, and where at the end of the week on Washington Week, or the end of the day on the NewsHour, you come away knowing a little something more than you knew before. And that, to me, is a triumph every single day. I come home every night knowing more than I knew the day before. Now, I may forget it by the next day, but I knew it that night. And that, to me, is far more gratifying than almost any other career or profession I could think of. So it's not the specific, well, I really nailed that interview tonight kind of moments. It's the cumulative effect of being satisfied that you've added something to the debate instead of detracted from it.
Hi, Gwen. You said earlier that you were an activist for the First Amendment, and I'm just curious about your ideas over the recently Supreme Court case over the protesting of military funerals.
What actually I said is people would assume I was an activist that I was an activist because I'm a journalist, but I'm not an activist for anything. However, I do think the First Amendment's a fine thing. Mostly because it allows me to do my job. But, okay, here's what happened for those of you who don't follow every little blip out of the Supreme Court. Remember the group from Kansas, Westboro Baptist Church, that shows up and pickets at military funerals? And they do it for obscure, twisted reasons that have to do with their objection to homosexuality. I say twisted because most of the time they're picketing the funerals of people who have nothing to do with the issue which they're picketing. But they were challenged, and it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld their right to do this. This was a free speech test. This is the real test of our democracy. When we look at something that we consider ourselves to be abhorrent, and yet the Constitution upholds it, that's when democracy gets complicated. That's when we have to be held to what we say our beliefs are. And if our beliefs are that you get to speak, then you get to speak. And that's what the Supreme Court said, and that is the true test of our citizenship.
Hi. Just drove in from Wisconsin to visit our son. and we're pleasantly surprised to find you're speaking tonight. So here we are.
And you were surprised to find Wisconsin still standing, right?
Well, I just wanted to get an idea from you about the reaction to the political activities taking place in Wisconsin right now. Those of you who aren't familiar, maybe you are.
You just heard the laughter? I think they're familiar.
Okay. All right, then I don't need to repeat anything of that. But give us an idea of what's the reaction in Washington.
Well, the latest I heard today is that the court ruled that they cannot enforce this law that they passed. I believe that's correct. But, that'll be challenged again. The interesting thing in Washington is we look at things when we do take our noses out of our navels. We look at what's happening in states around the country and we try to detect whether there is something we should be paying attention to. And in the case of Wisconsin, we're hoping for trends because trends make it a national story. So you look at Wisconsin and you look at Ohio and you look at Indiana where the Democratic legislators just came back from Illinois. And you begin to think there is something happening. What seems to be happening is not just that folks are angry, not just that a new bunch of Republican governors have come in and have decided to roll back union benefits. It's that there is there's activism which is alive again on a state level and on a local level, which is worth paying attention to. It's playing out in dramatic fashion in Madison and in Indianapolis and in Columbus, but it's also playing out in different ways in states like New Jersey and California, where they have had to make some really tough budget choices about how to balance budgets, which it turns out states actually have to do. They don't run deficits like the federal government. And the choices that have to be made and how they are communicated is going to be an interesting test case. We're all going to look back on this year and use it as a way of, I think if politicians are smart, looking at the way as how to do this right, how to do this wrong, and what price you pay when the voters are actually paying attention. It should be said that 1/3 of the people who voted for Governor Scott Walker were union members, so they maybe weren't paying attention.
Hi. Will you tell us what you think about the Juan Williams NPR ordeal?
Probably not. I will say this. National Public Radio, we don't even call it that anymore, NPR, is an amazing resource that does work like no other news organization. When we're sitting here in Washington, and around the country debating whether one commentator should have been fired for an intemperate thing that he said, you can debate whether he's fired right, whether he was fired wrong, whether he said was offensive or not. But the fact is, I turn on the radio in the morning and in the afternoon, and I listen to All Things Considered, and I listen to Morning Edition, and I hear reporters under fire in Tahrir Square. I hear reporters reporting from Ivory Coast where no one is. I hear reporters who are telling me stories I'm not hearing anywhere else and in ways I'm not hearing, and they're underpaid, and they're lying on their stomachs in some sort of war zone saying, Juan Williams said what? Doesn't matter. They're doing their jobs. And so what I find the most frustrating about this whole episode is that NPR has been insufficiently defended for the kind of work they do. And it's not, and I, of course, love the news programming, but there are so many things they do that don't exist anywhere else. And this truth that also doesn't get told about this whole debate about public broadcasting funding is the degree to which any of it is really going to, is really coming out of your pockets. It's not that much money. It's low-hanging fruit. But in addition to that, we also have the real threat, which is that small stations in states and cities and counties that are covering the state house, that are covering local government in places where nobody else is doing it, where commercial broadcasters have pulled out, will go dark. They rely much more heavily on that federal subsidy than anybody who does the work I do in Washington in national NPR or at PBS. So we have to consider very carefully the costs of what we do when we turn what I think is honorable work into a political football.
I'm anxious to read your book for the light that it sheds on race in the recent elections. But my question has to do with gender. And I understand there's some studies out now looking at how women were portrayed in the 2008 election. And even Katie Couric said that the media got it wrong and maybe didn't treat the women candidates in the same way as men. Can you comment on where we've come with gender and how the media deals with gender?
Well, we don't deal with it any better than we deal with a lot of things. The truth is there is a lot of knee-jerk reaction and old-fashioned notions about what women's place is supposed to be. And most of it is in code words, by the way. Most of it doesn't have a whole lot to do with. I mean, one of Geraldine Ferraro's enduring frustrations is that she felt that even though she broke through in a dramatic way when she was the first woman as vice presidential nominee, that 24 years later before we had Sarah Palin as a vice presidential nominee, and in that period of time, there always seemed to be a pretty low ceiling for women candidates. So yeah, it's true. Now, the one thing I guess I went back and forth on throughout the campaign is the degree to which some of the questions that are directed at women candidates wouldn't have been directed at anybody who was a new thing. Katie Couric, you mentioned, did a tremendous interview with Sarah Palin, who I think would tell you that interview was unfair and sexist, where I thought it was enlightening. So it's all where you're sitting often. I think often, you have to expect that people are going to look at you through the veil of what their experience is, and you have to decide whether you're going to account for that or not. I don't know many women out there who in office or running for office who are standing around saying, but they treated me bad. They're just figuring out how to work through it, around it, or over it, because it's not changing overnight. Hi.
Hi. As kind of an extension of the question on NPR, in view of the changes in technology and the influence of big money, could you comment on what you see the future of journalism in democracy?
Where's the big money? I'd like to have some of that.
Fox News.
Well, I guess I'm out of luck. By the way, I don't think it's fair to say Fox News has big money, and therefore, I don't think they have bigger money than NBC and GE. I don't know. You may not agree with what comes out of it, but I don't think it's money that's driving that. It's ideology, perhaps, in some cases. I think that the bigger threat to the work I do is how we choose to get our information. I talked to, it may have been Amanda at dinner, who said she gets all her news on the web, which is actually great. It doesn't mean that she's not looking at mainstream sources. She probably is. It doesn't mean she's looking at news aggregators, which send her to lots of different places. She probably is. So am I. But when I was in college, and Amanda's age, I was maybe, if I was lucky, reading a newspaper a week. And maybe if I was lucky, watching a newscast a week. Now, that makes her a lot more informed now than I was, even though I wanted to be a journalist, which tells you something. I'm not sure what. That you'll come back to your senses as you get older, probably. But the difference in this, the challenge for all of us out here, is that there are so many other ways to get your information that they're never going to come back to watching the news at 6 o'clock at night like people in this room might, because, frankly, that's just not the way anybody's socialized anymore. So we have to go to where the viewers are instead of expecting that they're magically going to come back to where we are, which means we have to find ways to get our iPad apps ready and our iPhone apps ready and find places to go and meet you and bring you the information. To me, what we have is a much greater array of choices to get your information than we ever had, which is really good. The only caveat to that is that by choosing where we get our information, sometimes we jumped into a silo and we never get out. And we only hear from people and from places that we want to hear, people who already agree with us, people who confirm our probably ill thought out notions often. What I would like to know is that we would scatter around and find out what other people think and maybe engage in a discussion and a debate. When I wrote this book about race, it was so interesting to me because when I traveled around the country to talk about it, I discovered my audiences were one-third, one-third, one-third. One-third were African-American readers who were so happy someone was writing them a book about a non-fiction book that didn't tell them what they ought to do to be better. One-third were PBS viewers, reasonably middle class or well-heeled, who feel pretty comfortable in the sense that they are right thinkers, but, deep thinkers. And 1/3 young people who never seen me on television, but maybe saw me on Saturday Night Live or Jon Stewart. But what was interesting to me was none of these three groups ever talk to each other. They never interact across social lines. Certainly the kids don't listen to the parents, and the parents think they have black friends, but they don't. And when you get them all together, they started asking questions and trading misconceptions. And it was enlightening for everybody in the room because they were in a safe place where they could actually share these things and not get yelled at, not get hooted out of the room, and maybe get schooled a little bit. So I always found it fascinating because watching the way people will interact given the opportunity to do that is very heartening for me. And I think that's going to be our salvation in the end, I hope.
Thank you very much for coming this evening to Iowa State and Ames, Iowa.
Thank you.
My concern is Libya, and I wonder what you see as far as the involvement of the American government and the American military in Libya in the next few weeks and months.
You know, I think if I knew that, they would hire me and give me a big job in the administration because I don't think they know. I think this is a point where they are trying to figure out. When I listen, one of the people I listen most closely to in this is Secretary Gates, because Secretary Gates has a history with Gaddafi, and he knows kind of what he can be like. And he was also, as you remember, quite the foot dragger on the idea that we should intervene in any, or even as far as a no-fly zone. He clearly is on board because he's a team guy now. But to listen to him talk about it, he's been it seems to me, very honest, as far as I know, in saying this is not an easy thing. We don't know what the outcome is. I know you would like an exit strategy, Senator, but I can't give you one right now. And I think that one of the reasons they can't give them one is because there are lots of pressures. Among the pressures, are our allies. I mean, France and Britain wanted to do this more than the U.S. did. And so the U.S. is now trying to create a situation in which they do it for a while and then step back, but it's unclear they can do that. Within the last 24 hours, we heard news that we actually have CIA agents or whatever they are, facilitators on the ground working with the rebels. And the first reaction was, oh no, we have people on the ground. And as someone said to me today, haven't we had people on the ground for 40 years in Libya? I mean, don't we have CIA agents everywhere? I would be a little nervous if we didn't have somebody somewhere talking to the rebels, but it turns out maybe we do. Now the question then becomes arming the rebels. We see these pictures of the rebels with their little shoulder-mounted guns fighting back against armored tanks, and you think to yourself, this can't end well. So to what degree do the allies in this coalition have to make sure it ends well? I think that those are all complicated questions that if they have the answers to right now, they're keeping them to themselves.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is in regards to something that we learned in one of our seminar series. I'm taking a seminar class.
A student, yay.
in facing history in ourselves. And one of the discussions that was brought up today, and our professor graciously let us out early so we could come and hear you speak tonight, was on journalism and reporting, and how do we get our community, or our nation for that matter, to be more of a caring nation. We spoke about something called psychic numbing, and I'm not a journalist student, so
that's right. I've never heard of that term either.
I can't remember if he was a journalist or a columnist, Chris Christoph, and his
Nicholas Christoph at the New York Times.
Yes. And I just wanted to know what you thought of his style, and whether we got into discussion of, was that really reporting and journalism, or was it more manipulation, and whether or not there was good and bad manipulation in the sense of trying to get these views across to our whole nation.
No, it's a great question, and it gives me a chance to make the distinction. What Nick Christoph does is undoubtedly journalism. There's no question about it. However, he's an advocacy journalist. And there's nothing wrong, but we have to understand the distinction. I don't do what Nick Christoph does. I'm your straight down the middle. This is what happened today. This is what it means. Maybe I'll give you a little analysis if you really lean on me, but that's it. Nick will say, I'm on the ground here in Sudan and people are starving, doggone it. What are you going to do about it? That's his role. He's supposed to be an opinion journalist. The people who write on the op-ed page are supposed to have a point of view. If they want to campaign, that's fine. That's what they do. But it's reported opinion, which is the kind I value, where they're actually talking to people and finding out on the ground. Nick Kristof has spent more of the last 3 months on the ground in Libya and Cairo than he has, I'm sure, at home in New York. Because he's going out there and he's on the ground and he's actually finding out. He's spent more time reporting on Sudan than probably any other single columnist. So he has passions that he's using his column to inform people. And that's completely honorable journalism, and there's a great tradition of it. There is also journalism which is just telling you the facts, ma'am, which is what I believe I do, and which I think you have to understand the distinction. Some people expect me to say, to become an advocate. It's just not going to happen. It's not what I was built for. But I think it's great that some people are, and I think you will find advocates of every political stripe. And when you look at the way that if you read an opinion page in a newspaper, you'll discover that they take pains on most days of the week to try to balance different points of view, but they are still points of view. So, thanks. I still don't know what psychic numbing is, though. I'm going to find out. Hi.
Hi, I'm an undergraduate student here. And I had a question about your career. You said at one point you were the angel of death. And I was wondering what was really the transition to where you are now?
It's a good question. You start out at the bottom in whatever you do. You just do. And you've got to be willing to do all of the crunchy stuff. You've got to be willing to do, I have had students walk up to me and say, I want to do what you do. And I go, what do you think that is exactly? Because I didn't do what I did when I was your age. So what do you mean? What I always wanted to do was be in a position to ask better questions of exceedingly more influential people and places. And I did that slowly. I mean, my first job really out of college after I almost didn't get hired was my first writing job was being a food writer. I did not know how to cook. I did not know what to do with a box of macaroni and cheese. Well, maybe the box of macaroni and cheese, but it was a chance to write. So I took a job working on food and answering the phones, and people would call in and say, how long do you cook a turkey for? And I'd say, I don't know. And I'd make it up. I had good instincts because if they didn't call me back, I figured they were dead or it worked. I don't make it up anymore, by the way. I'm a very good cook. But I went from there to working, covering school committee, to covering City Hall in Baltimore, to covering the State House, to covering Congress, to covering a presidential campaign, to covering the White House. And only then did I then go to television, where I covered Congress and then some more political campaigns. And only then did I get my own show. So that was a career arc of 20 or 30 years. And so how did I get from being the angel of death, where they never let me in the room because I was going to kill a candidacy, to being at a point where they kind of don't mind me when I show up, which actually isn't that long a distance, is hard work over a long period of time. Any more questions? Really? I'm so hurt. Well, can I ask a question? Oh, there's someone. Well, when you make your way to the mic, let me ask a question. Washington Week, how did it get started? I mean, I can tell you it's a 42-year-old program, which has been it was the longest program of its type, which is, say, a public affairs roundtable ever. I mean, it's been on the air longer than any other. And it started just basically for old white guys sitting in a dark studio saying, well, the president told me today. For a long time, this was the program. And I got on the program for the first time as a panelist in 1991 when I was working for the New York Times and covering Bill Clinton. And I even then was one of the few women on the program. But I was not the first. There were several others. And they would be nice. There was one panelist who would look at me when I said something and would wink. As if to say, nice thing, little girl, you know. But I like to think that I've been there now 11 years, and in the time I've been there, I've strived to make it more of the moment, more capturing the news of the day with a wider variety and diversity of panelists, and but still to maintain its core, which is as a place to go at the end of the week where you can kick back and find out what things mean. I want to ask you guys a question now that I have the chance. Show of hands, how many of you are really excited about 2012? Wow, that's not a lot of hands. Why not? Too early. Well, but you know, you've got people coming already. I mean, Donald Trump might come. What? So should I not come back? Thank you all so much.
Again, I am trying to get Gwen to come back. I told her today that she has to come back to Iowa State the August 11th to August 13th, when we have the Republican presidential candidate debate in Stevens Auditorium, and our Iowa straw poll, which I described as a county fair with candidates. Anyway, we're having a book signing now. Pat Miller, where is that located? Back in the back by Aja over there. Aja has a lot. Okay, Aja, thank you. Book signing. We also have some treats, a few treats in the back. So please stay. Again, I want to thank you, first of all, so much for coming out tonight. You've been a great audience. Gwen, third time's a charm. This is the third time we've asked her to come, and it worked out. I'm really happy that she could be here with us tonight. And so, again, thank you, and thank you to our co-sponsors, and especially we're happy to end Women's History Month and to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Holiday celebration with this great event. So thank you again. Huh?